So exactly 1 year ago, I did my very first top 10 video titled Top 10 MMORPGs of 2017. We've come a long way over the past year, being at around a few thousand subscribers at the time of posting that video and currently coming in at around 60,000. So what have we learned over the past year? Good question. I recently uploaded a video titled Are MMORPGs Worth Playing Anymore? The State of MMOs and MMORPGs in 2018. I recommend checking that out if you want my thoughts on what I've learned about MMORPGs over the last year. This is, after all, a top list featuring the top MMORPGs of this year, right? Well, unfortunately, there weren't 10 MMORPG releases this year. There were only a handful, and not a single release actually did good. Therefore, instead of a top 10 video featuring a non-existent list of MMORPGs, I figure I may as well go ahead and list the best MMORPGs left currently running with enough of a population to actually continue worth playing. Please note that this is a different kind of top video, as instead of listing 10 different games, I plan on going through more than likely quite a few more. Blade & Soul. Even though they recently merged all of their servers together into 2 large servers, Blade & Soul continues to release new content every few months, which constantly brings players back. Admittedly, the game has been called pay to win in the past, as quote-unquote whales have infested the servers, but regardless, the game itself is an absolute blast to play. It has fantastic graphics, gameplay, and is probably one of the most fun free-to-play MMORPGs I have played. It is definitely worth investing time into, and is actually one of the few MMORPGs I have actually played actively with my girlfriend. We also have a clan on Zulia, if you guys want to join, called the Bytes. And yes, this is a shameless plug. One of the 2 buy-to-play MMORPGs on this list, BDO is one of the best-looking MMORPGs on the list, or rather, is one of the best-looking MMORPGs in general. Not only that, but some people argue that it in fact has the best combat in an MMORPG. Regardless, with BDO's recent server merges earlier in the year, it has made the pool of players much more centralized, and after launching on Steam, its player base has grown exponentially. It is very likely to be one of the 5 most populated MMORPGs at this point. Star Wars The Old Republic, or The Old Republic as I'll refer to it as for the sake of this video, is emptier than most of the games on this list, but it is still active enough to invest time into. It's a huge game with a lot of high quality content, voice acting, and it's freaking Star Wars, man. Who wouldn't want to play that? Regardless, there are, like Blade & Soul, complaints about the game being pay to win. I'm neither able to confirm nor deny whether or not the game is in fact pay to win, but that shouldn't detract from your enjoyment of the actual game. Most free-to-play MMORPGs are ultimately pay to win. That is why, after all, we have buy-to-play and pay-to-play MMORPGs, or at the very least, a handful of each left. Likely the only sci-fi or truly sci-fi MMORPG in this list, EVE is probably the most unique MMORPG I have ever played. Although admittedly I didn't really enjoy it, as it is quite a complex game that requires more than a few hours dedicated to understanding the complexity of the game, it nevertheless continues to entertain a plethora of players, especially with it going free-to-play earlier in the year, much to the surprise of both the player base and new players alike. Probably the only MMORPG out there for people that want to engage in space exploration. Although not nearly as popular as it once was, TERA still holds enough players captive by their keen and awfully specific liking of female-exclusive classes. Although people often complain about gender-specific classes and the Ellen being too lolly for their tastes and being incredibly over-sexualized, the fact is that for a free-to-play MMORPG, TERA does everything right. Or, it did everything right. Before they went and nerfed the dungeons, and then they buffed the dungeons. That shit was just silly. Regardless, TERA is still an amazing looking, incredibly detailed MMORPG with a lot to do and a lot to see. It is still in the 5 most populated MMORPGs and will likely continue to remain as one of them for a while to come. Now, the reason I'm going to continue to push this is for a couple of reasons. 1, the game is just damn good, like really, really good. Number 2, PSO2 has the potential to have a Western release if Sega would just get off their lazy asses and push it westward. 3, there is actually an English patch for the game, which makes quite a lot of it playable and easy to follow through in English. 4, quite a few English-speaking players play the game and actually make a specific ship their home. All of the above make PSO2 a game worth investing time into. It is probably one of my top 5 favorite MMORPGs to play. If only Sega would actually do something about it, they would make one little man and a lot of his followers very, very happy. Naturally, no list would be complete without Guild Wars 2 being a part of it. Guild Wars 2 and further the Guild Wars franchise itself has been a staple of the MMORPG community for many a year. With its recent Path of Fire expansion, the game has had new life breathed into it. Not that the game itself was ever in any immediate danger, as the game is still fairly densely populated. Being the 4th largest most populated MMORPG is no small feat. Being an MMORPG that transitioned from a buy-to-play model to a successful free-to-play model, however, is also noteworthy. All while not buckling under the pay-to-win bullshit that so often surrounds free-to-play MMORPGs. Or, more appropriately, the Raiderz private server Wild Raiderz is one of the only private servers I'd ever recommend for an MMORPG. I never got to play Raiderz when Perfect World Entertainment published the game, but I know a lot of people were upset when they shut it down. More recently, however, I have been playing through Wild Raiderz, and the game itself is a lot of fun. It's a little more reminiscent of BDO if BDO were, say, maybe 5 years old. If you're having trouble running BDO and want a good, free alternative that isn't Blade and Soul, then Raiderz is the way to go. A non-English MMORPG that is probably on par with PSO2 for one of the best MMORPGs in its respective niche. However, while PSO2 has the potential to have a Western release in the future sometime, Monster Hunter Online I doubt ever will. There is an English patch that can be applied to the game, but in the end, it'll never really be released to the West, and there isn't really an awfully large English community once again like PSO2 has. Nevertheless, if you enjoy Monster Hunter games and want to play this with some friends, get together, apply the patch, and do it. It's worth the time it'll take to get in, trust me. The second largest MMORPG available right now, Final Fantasy XIV is coming off of the huge influx of both new and returning players that joined for the recent Stormblood expansion. Final Fantasy XIV's largest, most expansive content update to the game yet. Final Fantasy XIV had one of the largest flops in MMORPG launch history, being beaten by maybe WildStar. But they managed to bounce back with such veracity that people just couldn't help but take note. It has since gone on to conquer the MMORPG niche by claiming the title of the second most played MMORPG, all while somehow remaining pay-to-play, something achievable by only one other MMORPG in the entire market. One of the oldest games in this list, RuneScape, or Old School RuneScape, whichever you prefer to play, is one of the 5 most populated MMORPGs still around at present. Admittedly, the game itself does feel a little dated, but that is merely due to the age of the game. It has had so many updates, gone through so many changes, and has remained more popular than most MMORPGs could dream of. While it does feel dated, it doesn't really take away from the fact that RuneScape is a very high quality game with a lot of features, something you can't really say about most newer MMORPGs. While many players debate which version of RuneScape is better between RuneScape and Old School RuneScape, the fact remains that both are good games in their own right, and you should definitely try out both for the full RuneScape experience. Admittedly, this is the only Pokemon MMORPG that I am probably willing to dedicate any time to at all. There are quite a few out there these days it seems, and although Revolution doesn't really have all the features some of the other games have, it is in my opinion the most perfected and realistic Pokemon feeling MMORPG out there. Graphically and even mechanically, Revolution is one of the most complete feeling Pokemon games I've played online, and I've played my fair share. I wish Nintendo would honestly just take note of the popularity these Pokemon MMORPGs have and actually push out something official. They would make an absolute killing if they handled this correctly. ESO is the 3rd most populated MMORPG, and it, like both Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, has had a recent expansion this year, the Morrowind expansion. One of my favorite Elder Scrolls games, Morrowind, finally came to ESO. I was, like many players, hyped for this, and it helped boost ESO to new heights, bringing in new player after new player, forcing many an old player to return as well to experience this beauty. ESO is a buy-to-play MMORPG, and I recall mentioning above that there were only 2 included in this list, this being the second game to hold a buy-to-play model and retain a player base worth being envious of. Being incredibly reminiscent of traditional Elder Scrolls games in terms of actual gameplay, playing through ESO should feel just like any other non-MMO Elder Scrolls game. People have complained about the graphical style being so different though, and I can see their point. It is very different to the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, something that not everyone is actually happy with. Or, like Raiderz, more appropriately, Scarlet Blade Vendetta. Scarlet Blade was shut down by Area Games and brought back up by the Vendetta Gaming Network. They brought back a very unique MMORPG that held quite a good number of active players before being shut down, and for good reason. It is probably one of the, if not the, most perverted MMORPG on the market. Mechanically, the game is nothing special, but the perv scale is absolutely off the charts. Even more so than in Blade and Soul or Black Desert Online, if you can believe that. Regardless of what people say, World of Warcraft is still the #1 most popular and most populated MMORPG on the market. The Legion expansion boosted WoW's subscriptions to Wrath of the Lich King numbers. And as Blizzard no longer publicly releases subscription numbers anymore, it is impossible to say exactly where WoW is currently in terms of population. Except that even at its lowest, it still held more subscriptions than any other MMORPG. It is also over 11 years old at present and has undergone more changes than almost any other MMORPG in existence. Even through all of this, even with all of these changes, even with all of these expansions, all of these nerfs, these buffs, everything, World of Warcraft has kept players coming back for more than a decade. If that isn't enough to convince you to try it, then I don't know what is. Now, this list is a follow-up, more or less, to my very first top 10 video. The very video that helped this channel take off. The same video that is actually approaching 2 million views right now. Hopefully you enjoyed that, hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully you were at least playing one of the MMORPGs in this list. Trust me, you won't find any games better than these, and you probably won't find a more accurate list than this one.